So, let's talk about how art gets made. The whole process is like a timeline. It's got a starting point, lots of stuff in the middle, and then it's finished. So, where does it all begin? Well, it starts with the urge to create something. When we talk about this urge to create, we have to separate it from what? We have to separate it from the urge to express or communicate. Everybody wants to express themselves, that's just natural. But wanting to express yourself doesn't mean you want to create something. So, you know that saying, angry people make great poets? It's only sort of true. Angry people make great poets basically means that when the urge hits you, right? I'm always pretty mad, but I'm not a poet. Just feeling mad isn't enough, you've got to do something with it. Because I'm not a poet, all that anger is just an urge to express it, and what happens? It turns into a shout, a really angry shout, but it's not art. So, for an artist, what's this impulse to express themselves really all about? It's the urge to create. Why is he an artist? Why does his urge to express directly translate into a creative impulse? Because he's had years of training in a particular art form. Let's go back to what we talked about earlier. When Mozart gets a feeling in his heart, what do we call that? It's called inspiration. What is inspiration? It's Mozart's way of expressing himself and his creative impulse. Now, let's look at another example, Zheng Banqiao, 18th century CE. He's a painter. What's he famous for painting? Bamboo. When he feels the urge to express himself, it turns into his creative impulse. Check this out. What does this creative impulse really mean? I found a quote from Banqiao's painting on page 142. Under the brisk autumn sky in my studio, getting up in the morning to view the bamboo. The mist, the sunlight, the dew, all float among the sparse branches and dense leaves. Stirring in the heart, a painting idea arises. So, this is the first step of the creative process. What's it called? Stirring in the heart, a painting idea arises. You know, you've probably felt something stirring in your heart, too, right? Sometimes when we travel and see some beautiful natural scenery, it moves us. Do you get a painting idea? Or do you feel inspired to make some music? Or maybe even some poetry? Nope, not really. Hey, you want to satisfy your impulse. And then there's only one thing left to do, grab your camera, no, your phone. Finally, you take a picture, calm your heart. By doing this, you've completed the task, just like any regular person would do. If you were an artist, that creative urge wouldn't just be some random itch, right? No way. If you were a painter, you'd feel that light bulb moment for a painting idea. If you were a poet, you'd get hit with poetic inspiration. If you were a musician, you'd have that musical inspiration pop up. So, what's the deal with this creative impulse? When that feeling zings in, what does it turn into? It's like getting a sneak peek of the beautiful image you're going to create, the sense of what's brewing in your heart, and that's what we call the painting idea, the poetic inspiration, the musical inspiration. That's how we separate the regular urge to express from the full-blown creative impulse. The itch to express is something everyone has, but for an artist, that itch is also the creative impulse. It's not like one comes before the other. When the urge hits, it's just there. But for an artist, that urge turns straight into the creative impulse. So, what's this creative impulse all about? It's like having the painting idea, the musical inspiration, the poetic inspiration, and so on, all bubble up. It's the very first step in the creative process. Let's keep it going. When your heart starts racing and the painting idea pops up, doesn't it create a vivid image of bamboo in your mind? That's the anticipation. The image of bamboo in your mind, It's not just the actual bamboo you see with your eyes. Seeing bamboo in real life means you're looking at the actual bamboo. I've seen it, you've seen it, we've all seen and marveled at it. But only Zheng Banxiao has that image in his heart, so what happens when he sees it? That's the image of bamboo in his mind. Do you have that vibrant image of bamboo in your mind? If you do, that's your creative impulse. Because if you didn't, you wouldn't be able to paint that. Of course, now you're getting all poetic, and you've got the image of bamboo brewing in your mind, ready to turn into words. So, when a painter gets in front of his canvas, that's like doing Western painting. And when he's facing his rice paper, that's what we call Chinese painting, right? We're just looking at empty sheets, huh? Just plain old blank canvas, nothing on it. But when the painter gets in front of his canvas, there's already something going on. There's something on it, but all we see is just a blank sheet, an empty canvas, nothing there at all. But in his mind, he's already got something going. How come? What's he bringing with him? His painting idea is staring at this piece of rice paper. It's like he's carrying that mental image of bamboo right there. This image of bamboo in his mind might be different, right? It may not be the actual bamboo that he sees. It may not be the same image seen with his eyes. In any case, he's got to do something about it. If all you see is the actual bamboo, what are you gonna do? Just stare at it? But if the bamboo in his mind has popped up, then he's definitely getting down to business, right? He wants to transfer that mental image of bamboo onto what? Onto the rice paper. So, he grinds the ink, preps the paper, and the brush starts moving with swift strokes. That's when the creative process kicks off. Things keep changing, suddenly shifting and transforming. That's the fast transformation. At this point, the work in hand is starting to take shape, am I right? This is how the creative process unfolds. Finally, we've got the bamboo in hand, right? But hey, the bamboo we actually paint isn't the same as the one we imagine. So, there are three versions of bamboo: the one we see, the one in our mind, and the one we end up putting on paper. And let me tell you, these three versions of bamboo are totally different, as it's been well pointed out. If the bamboo in our mind was just like the one we paint, everything we've been saying would be pointless. What were we saying, anyway? What's at the core of creating? It's all about exploring and discovering. If we could just copy the bamboo in our mind onto the paper, where's the creativity in that? That's just craftsmanship, right? The distinction between these three versions of bamboo really spells out the essence and process of artistic creation. And when the artwork is done, the bamboo we've painted still holds onto the essence of the bamboo in our mind. So, here's the bottom line. What's the deal? Basically, firstly, it's in the mind's canvas, that's what starts it. But the charm and appeal is outside the rules of brushwork, and this applies not only to painting. Let's break down these three sentences. The first sentence says, "The intent precedes the brush." This is a common principle that applies to any kind of artistic creation, regardless of the art form. What do we mean by a common principle? It's referring to the creative drive or impulse that underlies all artistic expression. In the case of Zheng Banxiao, he called this the painting intent, or the bamboo in the heart, the creative urge that precedes the physical act of creation. Let's take calligraphy as an example. When you first learn calligraphy, you don't have the style of the characters in your mind yet, right? So you start by imitating famous ones, like copying the calligraphy works of Wang Shiji, 4th century CE. You practice copying for a while. After a long time of practicing, your own calligraphic works can finally measure up, right? At this stage, you are no longer willing to just be an imitator of Wang Shiji, because your purpose in writing calligraphy is to express your own life experiences through it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be considered art, it would just be skillful craftsmanship, making the characters look nice. But what's the point of just making the characters look nice? We want to imbue our works with our life experiences and feelings. There should even be an infinite, expansive world contained within each piece. The traces left by the brush strokes should convey a sense of the boundless within the finite. This is why calligraphy is an art form. You are no longer satisfied with just imitating the masterpieces of Wang Shiji. You want to use calligraphy to express your own life experiences and feelings. At this point, when you write, the intention precedes the brush, the idea in your mind shapes how the characters will be written. This is called intention preceding the brush. You already have a mental conception of what the characters should look like before you even put brush to paper. The rice paper is ready, and as a calligrapher, you are about to write on it. But do you immediately put brush to paper? No, you already have a premonition in your heart. That sense of excitement and inspiration in your heart, this is the mental picture. However, you do not simply transfer this mental picture directly onto the rice paper. And this is where the next phrase comes in: the real excitement lies beyond the rules of brushwork. The final result, the charm and appeal of the calligraphic work you create, will not be solely defined by the rules of calligraphy that you have previously learned. It will be something that surprises you, as if a divine creative force has taken over. This is what is meant by, the charm lies beyond the rules. The rules refer to the established rules of brushwork that we have mastered. But true calligraphic creation must transcend these rules. The charm emerges from beyond them. This creative process involves exploration. In the end, the style of characters you write may be something you did not anticipate at the start. There is an important intermediate stage here called inspiration. This inspiration, this creative spark, allows the charm to lie beyond the rules. The final line sums it up. Does this apply only to painting? No, it applies to all forms of art. Poetry also has the intention preceding the brush, as does calligraphy and musical composition. And then the creative process becomes one where the charm lies beyond the rules. An exploration, a discovery. You gotta remember what Zheng Banqiao said. His words pack a punch, stronger than a bunch of stuff I wrote in my art philosophy bit. He summed it all up, and once we get the deal with the 3 types of bamboo, we'll get it all. So, these 3 types of bamboo, they're all different. The bamboo in your eyes represents real life. The bamboo in your heart is like a gut feeling of aesthetic imagery, you know, that creative spark. And then, the final work that comes out is what we call the bamboo in hand. If you keep in mind how these 3 types of bamboo relate to each other, you'll really get the essence and process of art creation on a whole other level. In the creative process, the most critical stage is called inspiration. Funny thing is, this word didn't even exist in Chinese back in the day. Later on, they went with the translation. Inspiration is like a sneaky ghost, it comes and goes without warning. Just pops in out of nowhere, and when it decides to leave, there's no stopping it. But hey, this whole mystery thing doesn't mean inspiration is all random and unpredictable. Inspiration is actually something you gotta prep for. So, how do we wrap our heads around this key stage in the creative process, inspiration? Picture this: when an artist gets hit with inspiration, all these beautiful and meaningful images start flooding their mind, and suddenly, they find that deep down something that erases the gap between them and their work. At the start of creating something, the artist is still working hard to bring it to life. They're making the thing, and there's still a clear separation between me and it. Inspiration hasn't kicked in just yet at this point. They're putting in the hard graft, but all that effort won't be for nothing. This dogged determination will eventually bring on a wave of inspiration. Hegel really got into talking about inspiration in his aesthetics lectures. He made a big deal about how inspiration doesn't just show up out of the blue. Even the most talented folks, chilling out in nature and soaking in the scenery, might not feel inspired. That's why the tough early stages of a project are key for getting inspired. Back in the Middle Ages, some rich folks shelled out cash to get artists to paint fancy pictures in their castles. But here's the funny part, the rich people didn't get that painting takes time. They'd be like, hey, you should be working. They thought the artists were just goofing off and wasting their money. But here's the kicker, these rich types didn't understand that during the early stages, the artists might look lazy, but inside, they were all worked up. Later on, when the artists suddenly got super focused and wouldn't stop working, that's when inspiration had hit. So, what's the deal with inspiration, anyway? Well, Hegel explained it best on page 147. When inspiration strikes, the artist doesn't see any line between themselves and their work. They become one with the creation process. So, Hegel put it like this, the artist puts aside their own quirks and stuff, totally diving into the subject. They become like a shaping force for the content they're immersed in, just part of the whole deal. These words might sound a bit boring, but they really hit the nail on the head. When artists hit that inspirational state, all the skills, passions, and personality they've built up from their art practice become the tools they need to breathe life into their work. They become totally intertwined with their creation, no longer separate from it. All their traits, talents, natural gifts, passion, and sense of beauty become the building blocks for their work. In this situation, the artist isn't really in charge. When inspiration strikes, they dive headfirst into their creation and can't be stopped. If the artist is separated from the themes of their work, then the artist's subjectivity functions as a special and incidental element, acting as a form of subjectivity. As for the work itself, if it does not go through such a state of inspiration, it will always remain merely the artist's subjective conception and decision. Ultimately, the work will not be one of true artistic value. If the artist isn't connected to the theme of his work, then his personal nature only plays a minor role. Without that inspirational state, his work won't really have artistic value, as it would just be reflecting the artist's personal intentions and decisions rather than being a result of true inspiration. So, Hegel was basically saying that if an artist's personal quirks and stuff take over and become the main focus of their work, instead of being a tool to bring the subject to life, then that's a pretty lousy inspiration. It's not even really inspiration at all, it's just the artist's own personal preferences taking over. This kind of thing happens a lot in art, especially nowadays. Artists sometimes get so caught up in their own style and ideas that they forget to let the actual subject of their work shine through. They think they're being all cutting edge and original, but really they're just letting their own ego get in the way. A truly skilled artist, though, when they're in the zone creating, they actually use all their personal traits and skills to bring the subject of their work to life, rather than letting their own personality overshadow everything. Explaining this inspiration thing is pretty tricky. In English, there's a word for it, which has its root in Sanskrit, Samadhi. You see this word a lot in Buddhist writings. In Chinese it is translated as Sanwei. The 3 in Sanwei isn't a number, it's just how the Sanskrit word sounds when written in Latin letters. So, what's Samadhi all about? Well, it's a big deal in Zen Buddhism. If you look it up in the dictionary, it's described as a special state of mind. It's like being super focused and concentrated, but that explanation only goes so far. It still doesn't really capture the full meaning of Samadhi. Now, let's talk about the concept of Samadhi in Zen Buddhism, which is super important and can help us understand what inspiration is in art. In Zen Buddhism, they're all about this idea of one act of Samadhi, which means living your life with a straightforward and sincere heart. What does that mean? It means fully immersing yourself in life without holding back. This idea actually influenced Confucianism. Later, during the Song dynasty, Confucianism talked about this too. For example, if a child falls into a well, your first reaction would be fear, followed by sympathy. It's like what Mencius said, the heart of compassion is aroused. Even though you and the child are separate, when you see the child in trouble, you can't help but feel scared and sympathetic, and you can't help but want to save them. This is called the initial thought. If you follow through with this initial thought, you'll go and save the child without second-guessing yourself. But if you suddenly start thinking about the consequences for yourself, like, will this be good or bad for me? That's changing your mind. That's not what Buddhism teaches as one act of Samadhi, and it's not living with a straightforward and sincere heart. So, back in the Song dynasty, the Confucian scholars had this saying, your first thought is like that of a wise person, but your second thought is like that of a beast. This idea influenced Zen Buddhism, which emphasizes the need for our life practice to be fully integrated with our inner selves, and they call this one act of Samadhi. When I'm doing something, I'm fully immersed in it. There's no separation between me and the task at hand. In that moment, I am the task itself, and this is what they call Samadhi. When an artist is in the zone creating a piece, they become one with the creation. It's not like they're creating on one side and observing from the outside on the other. Unless you see the process of artistic creation as a technical design process, where you're constantly applying your knowledge and skills to refine it, and when you find problems, you're not fully integrated with your creation. Real creativity comes from being in a state of inspiration. Ever wonder why artists are often surprised by their own finished work? It's because the result of their creation goes way beyond what they originally intended. If everything they created came solely from their original intention, there wouldn't be any creativity. So, we can use the concept of Samadhi in Zen Buddhism to understand the essence of inspiration in artistic creation. Zen Buddhism encourages us to live our lives in a way that fully integrates our actions with our true selves. This is the ideal way of life according to Zen Buddhism. So, I think we've been able to explain the essence of the state of inspiration in artistic creation. It's not just a stroke of luck, it's a necessity that arises from the hard work and exploration in the initial phase of creation. After putting in the effort in the first phase, we eventually reach that state.